In the depths of a landscape that seemed painted by the gods, where green hills rolled softly under the blue sky, a prosperous farm resting on apparent peace. It was a place of abundant life, hard work and simple rewards, a will to the effort of generations. In the heart of this pastoral idyl, a bull of magnificent proportions, an unquestionable creature of strength and nobility, the pride of the flock and the farmer. However, subtle dissonance began to disturb the harmony of the place, a note of sadness that infiltrated the morning breeze. A strange sound, a low and continuous regret, began to emanate from the pasture, a cry that challenged the serene beauty of the farm. The other animals, from cattle to sheep, felt the disturbance in the air. Their daily routines died by an inexplicable anxiety. The sun was born and put it, painting the sky with glorious colors. But the lament persisted, a constant reminder of a deep and invisible pain, an open wound in the soul of that blessed earth. The farmer, a practical man and used to the rhythms of nature, at first ignored sound, but his persistence began to erode the tranquility of his world. He was a colossus of muscle and power, a mountain of life that should dominate the landscape with its imposing presence. However, his posture told a different story, a narrative of defeat and deep desolation. His massive head, crowned by formidable horns, hung heavily toward the ground, as if the weight of the world were on his wide and powerful shoulders. His eyes, which once glowed with the fire of vitality and pride, were now turbid, veiled by a mist of perpetual sadness. Windows for a tormented soul. He moved away from the rest of the flock, seeking an isolation that mirrored his inner pain, a lonely figure against the infinite horizon. Food, sweet hay and fresh water did not try it. He moved away from any livelihood, his gigantic body weakening with each passing day. The sound that came out of his guts was not a roar of challenge or anger, but a deep and deep groan, a vibration of pure misery that seemed to shake his own earth under his hooves. It was the sound of a broken heart, an echo of loss that no one around him could understand or relieve. The days became a count of growing concern on the farm. The first day of the lament was an anomaly, a passing curiosity for the farmer. On the second day, curiosity gave way to genuine concern, because the sound did not cease, becoming deeper and sadder. On the third day, the situation had become a distressing puzzle, a mystery that challenged the entire logic and experience of the field. The farmer, desperate for a solution, tried all the medicines he knew, using ancient wisdom and modern treatments. A veterinarian was called, a man of science and reason, who examined the bull meticulously, looking for any sign of injury, illness, or physical affliction. But the verdict was disconcerting. The animal was physically perfect. There was no fever, no fractures, no infections. The veterinarian left scratching his head, offering only vague theories about stress or some subtle environmental change, leaving the farmer alone with mystery and growing frustration. The bull's cry became the new beat of the farm's heart, a melancholy and constant rhythm that broke the silence of the night and haunted the light of day. The anguish of the giant bull did not go unnoticed by the other inhabitants of the farm. His pain spread like a silent wave throughout the ecosystem. The herd cows, their pasture, kept a respectful but nervous distance. They thrown apprehensive glances toward their direction, their lowest and less frequent mujos, as if they fear further disturbing the bereaved giant. The sheep, creatures of gregarious instinct, were even more huddled in the other, their soft bullets tinged with a new urgency, seeking comfort in the union against the sadness that permeated the air. Even the farm dog, an animal usually noisy and full of energy, seemed to have been infected with melancholy. His playful barks were replaced by low gainids, and his step became more cautious as he crossed the courtyard. It was as if the pain of the bull were a soul disease, an emotional contagion that launched a shadow of restlessness over each living being in the green hill. The natural harmony of life on the farm had been broken, unbalanced by the depth of the suffering of a single creature, a silent testimony of the invisible web that connects all lives. When the darkness descended over the hills, the bull's lament acquired a new dimension of loneliness and despair. The moon, a silent witness in the velvet sky, threw long and ghostly shadows over the pastures, turning the family landscape into a kingdom of mystery. In the stillness of the night, the sound of the cry traveled further, an amazing echo floating through the valley, crossing fields and forests. He reached the windows of the small houses of the neighboring village, infiltrating the dreams of the residents. People started talking, whispering low on the nightly lament that came from the farm in the hill. Ancient stories and forgotten legends were dug, tales of tormented spirits and cursed lands that were passed from generation to generation. The private pain of the bull was gradually becoming a public phenomenon, a local mystery that sharpened a collective imagination and aroused a primordial fear of the unknown. The sound of his sadness became the soundtrack of the village nights, a melancholy lullaby song that haunted sleep and filled the hearts of a strange and shared apprehension. Time advanced, and autumn began to weave their hot-colored tapestry over the landscape, painting the leaves of the trees with vibrant gold, red, and orange tones. Nature prepared for winter rest in an explosion of glorious beauty, but to the bereaved bull, the world remained devoid of color, a gray desert of pain. The spectacular beauty that surrounded him was only to accentuate the contrast with his inner turbulence, a cruel reminder of the joy he could no longer feel. The air was cooler, the winds blowing colder, announcing the change of seasons, but it remained motionless in its chosen place, a monument to its own pain, apparently oblivious to the world in transformation around it. His sadness was a timeless state, a constant and unchanging anchor in an ocean of cyclical change. He was a statue of suffering, sculpted in flesh and bone, a moving challenge to the promise of renewal, of nature, proof that some wounds are so deep that neither the most sublime beauty can touch or cure them. The inability to relieve the suffering of his most valuable creature began to weigh on the farmer, transforming his initial frustration into silent despair. He had spilled his life, his sweat, and his dreams in that land, in those animals. The bull, in particular, was to be the crown jewel of his work, a living symbol of his success, his ability as a creator. Now the magnificent animal had become an emblem of its failure, a mirror of its powerlessness to understand the creatures that were under their care. He began to find apologies to avoid the pasture, for the sound of the bull's cry resounded in his ears as a personal accusation, a constant reminder of his inadequacy. A complex mixture of resentment and an overwhelming penalty grew in his heart. Financial concerns about the loss of his investment were real, but they were overcome by a deeper and more corrosive feeling. The feeling that he had broken sacred confidence, an ancient pact not written between man and the beast, leaving him in a sea of guilt. The raw and incessant exhibition of emotion by the bull forced the farmer and all who witnessed the phenomenon to confront a deep and disconcerting question. Could an animal, a cargo beast, have a soul, a conscience capable of experiencing such a deep and lasting mourning? The farmer, a man of the earth, always turns his animals as goods, as cattle to be raised, fed, and eventually sold. It was a practical view, devoid of sentimentality, forged by the harsh reality of agricultural life. But the visceral pain of the bull, his tears that were not just water and salt, but the very essence of suffering, shook the foundations of his worldview. He was forced to consider the possibility of an inner life in his creatures, a depth of feeling he had never daring to imagine. The regret of the bull transcended instinct. It was an expression of something more, something that spoke of a shared capacity for pain, loss, and love, a universal language that united all life forms in a tapestry of sensitive and interconnected existence. The hill, with its green grass and fertile soil, seemed to absorb the sadness that emanated from the bull, as if the earth itself was mourning with it. The vegetation around the place where the animal remained day and night seemed less vibrant. The slightly pale color and the air in that part of the pasture seemed heavier, loaded with a palpable melancholy. The Green Hill, rather a name that evoked peace and prosperity, was slowly becoming known in the region as the lament idyl. His identity had been transformed by emotion. the physical and spiritual landscape shaped by the broken heart of a single creature. The scenario was mounted, the stage prepared for an intervention that would come from an unexpected place. The pain had created a vacuum, a desperate so-called silence between the moans. It was a rescue request that could not be answered with medicines or human logic, but waited for a spirit like someone who could hear beyond the noise of pain and understand the silent appeal by connection that hid under the endless days of crying. For the outside world, the pain of the bull was a sound, a hearing disturbance that broke the peace of the rural landscape. It was a mystery to be solved, a problem to be fixed, a noise to be silenced. The farmer heard the lament and via an investment at risk. The neighbors listened to the night echo and felt a shiver of superstition. The veterinarian heard the moans and was looking for a physical pathology. Everyone listened, but no one really saw. No one saw the memories that passed through the bull's blurred eyes. The loss of a flock companion, perhaps a calf that had been taken too early, or simply the existential pain of a sensitive soul attached to a powerful corpus. The tears that ran down from his eyes were invisible to most, overshadowed by the overwhelming sound of his suffering. They were tears of deep loneliness, the loneliness of those who suffer a pain that no one else can understand or even recognize. His sadness was a foreign language in his own land, a heart dialect that no one around him spoke, leaving him isolated on an island of agony. The experience of mourning is, in essence, a lonely path, even for humans who have language to express their pain. For the bull, this loneliness was absolute, an insurmountable abyss. He was surrounded by other living beings, by a pulsating nature, but his internal reality was a universe apart, a vacuum of loss. He saw the other cows grazing, indifferent in his daily routine, and his alienation deepened. They could not offer him comfort, for they did not understand the nature of his wound. The communication itself was a barrier. His regret, the only tool he had to externalize his anguish, was interpreted as a symptom, not as a message. It was like screaming for help in a room full of people who use ear protectors, who see their lips move but cannot decipher the urgency of their appeal. This disconnection was perhaps the cruel part of his suffering. The certainty that his pain, however immense and real to him, would forever remain invisible and misunderstood by those who shared his world. The days dragged on a gray monotony, every sunrise bringing with it the promise of another cycle of silent pain. The bull did not mark the time for the hours, but for the waves of sadness that plagued him. There were times when the pain was a sharp twinge, a vivid memory that made him moan louder, and moments when he became a low and constant buzz, the backdrop of his existence. He had become a prisoner of his own mind, of his own emotions. The green pasture, which once represented freedom and abundance, was now his cell. He traced the same ways every day, a meaningless pattern around his wakefulness, a ritual of suffering. The invisibility of his tears was a metaphor for the invisibility of his own identity as being sentient. In the eyes of others, he was an asset, an award-winning bull, a problem. No one saw him as he felt, a soul in mourning, a broken heart longing for a touch of empathy in an indifferent world. Indifference was not necessarily born of evil. The farmer was a good man, but his perspective was limited by his experience and the purpose of his profession. He took care of the physical well-being of his animals, ensuring that they had food, water, and shelter. The idea of taking care of the bull's emotional well-being was a strange concept, almost absurd to him. His inability to see tears was not a flaw of character, but a failure of imagination, an inability to transpose the barrier between species in such an intimate way. The world of men and the world of animals, though intertwined, ran on parallel trails of perception. The farmer saw a healthy body and found no disease. He did not have the tools to diagnose a sick soul. And so, the bull continued to cry, his tears mingling with the morning dew. Not seen, not recognized, a salty source of pain that sprouted from a well of sadness that no one knew existed. Nature around, in his silent wisdom, seemed to be the only one to recognize the depth of the pain of the bull. The wind that whispered through the tall gram seemed to carry his laments with a special solemnity. The rain that fell from the gray sky seemed to wash his powerful corpus in a baptism of shared sadness. The birds that sang in the nearby trees seemed to take a break from their melodies, as if hearing the funeral song that rose from the pasture. There was a tacit communion between the bull and the natural world, a resonance that escaped human perception. It was as if the earth, the mother of all creatures, understood the language of pain without the need for words. She saw her unhealthy tears. She felt the broken heart tremor, and involved the sufferer in an invisible hug of elemental compassion. But this passive comfort was not enough to heal the wound, just to witness it in its deep and lonely majesty. Over the weeks, a kind of resignation began to settle in the bull. The initial struggle, the desperate search for an exit to his agony, gave way to apathetic acceptance of his destiny. His moans have become less urgent, more rhythmic, like the ticker of a clock, marking the time of his sadness. He no longer expected anyone to come to his aid, that no one understood. He had retired into himself to a fortress of pain where no one else could enter. His tears now were for himself, a private mourning ceremony that was repeated day after day. The outside world, with its sounds, its colors, and its indifferent inhabitants, became a distant blur, an irrelevant scenario for the drama that unfolded inside. He was becoming a ghost in his own life, his massive body still present in the pasture, but his essence, his soul, had already left for a distant and dark place. The loneliness of the bull mourning served as a mirror for human loneliness. How many times do people suffer in silence, their tears shed in the privacy of their rooms, their soul pain hidden behind forced smiles? The world continues to spin, people continue with their lives, often unrelated to the turbulence that consumes someone by their side. The history of the bull is the story of every soul that has already felt misunderstood, with all the heart that already shouted for help in a language that no one seemed to speak. His pain, although manifested in moans and isolation, is a universal symbol of the experience of suffering. He reminds us that empathy requires more than just listening. It requires an effort to see beyond the surface, to recognize humanity or member in the other, and to validate its pain as real and significant, even if we cannot fully understand it. Irony was palpable. A huge creature of size and strength, capable of subjugating any physical threat, was being defeated by something invisible, intangible. His muscle strength was useless against the weakness of his spirit. This hidden vulnerability was the heart of its tragedy. The world saw power, the imposing housing, and could not reconcile this image with the sound of such helpless suffering. This cognitive dissonance created a barrier for empathy. It was easier to suppose that he was sick or crazy than accepting the uncomfortable truth that such a powerful creature could be so emotionally fragile. The tears that no one saw were therefore the heaviest, for they carried not only the weight of pain, but also the weight of misunderstanding and overwhelming loneliness it generated. Each tear did not see was a silent testimony from the depth of the abyss that separated him from the rest of the world. However, even in the deepest darkness, a small crack of light may be sufficient to start a change. The persistence of the bull's lament, though misunderstood, was slowly eroding the normality of life on the farm and the village. The constant sound, the palpable sadness in the air, was creating a ripple, a question that refused to be ignored. It was a preparation, a soil softening so that a new seed could germinate. The invisible tears of the bull, although not seen directly, were watering the ground for an unlikely meeting. They were a call that until then had not found their recipient. But the universe has its own ways to connect the souls in need, and the echo of that lonely pain traveled through the wind, waiting patiently to land in the heart of someone who could not only hear the sound, but to see the tear behind it and understand its true and deep message. A few kilometers from the Hill of the Lament, in a small, modest house at the end of the village, a man named Arthur lived. He was a grandfather, a man whose shoulders carried the weight of 80 years of life, past joys and recent losses. Her hair was white like snow, and her face a map of wrinkles that told stories of laughter and tears. 2 years ago, he had said goodbye to his wife, Helena, the companion of a lifetime, and since then a heavy silence had settled in her house and in her heart. Arthur's days were marked by an empty and repetitive routine. He woke up, prepared the coffee for one, read the newspaper without much interest, and took care of his small garden with a care that could not fill the void inside it. His sons and grandchildren visited him, but his busy lives could not fill the long hours of loneliness that stretched before him as an endless desert. Arthur was a lone heart, a soul drifting in search of a port, a comfortable comfort. The nights were the hardest part for Arthur. When the sun was put and the darkness surrounded his small home, Helena's absence became almost a physical presence. He sat in his favorite armchair, the same where she used to sit down to knit, and the silence of the house was deafening. It was on one of these silent nights that he first heard. At first it was a weak, distant sound taken by the night breeze, a sound that he could not identify. He thought it could be the howl of the wind or some animal of the forest. But the sound returned the next night, and the other later. It was a sound unlike anything he had ever heard, a long and melancholy lament, laden with a sadness that resonated with his own. The sound came from the farm direction in the hill, and Arthur's curiosity began to overcome his apathy. That mysterious lament was the first thing for a long time that could penetrate the mist of his own loneliness. Arthur began to hear the conversations in the village. People spoke of the Cries bull, from the mystery on the old Matthew farm. Some spoke in fear, others with mockery, but everyone spoke with a tip of fascination. For Arthur, however, the story was neither fascinating nor scary. It was deeply sad. He, more than anyone, understood what it was to carry a pain that could not be shared. He knew what it was like to feel the heavy heart to the point of wanting to scream at the emptiness. While the others heard a strange sound, Arthur heard an echo of his own suffering. He imagined himself sitting alone in his armchair, and imagined that giant bull alone in his pasture, both prisoners of his own forms of mourning. A strange and invisible connection began to form in his mind, a wire of empathy that binded him to that unknown and suffering creature in the distant hill. Arthur's days gained a new focus. He spent more outdoors in his garden, hoping to hear the lament during the day. And he heard. The sound was weaker in the sunlight, often drowned out of the noises of daily life, but it was there, a constant reminder of that persistent pain. He began to feel a growing need, a boost that could not explain. It was not just curiosity, it was a call. He felt he needed to see with his own eyes who needed to be in the presence of that creature. Perhaps it was the need to confirm that he was not alone in his sadness, that another soul in the universe shared a similar feeling. Or maybe it was something deeper, an instinct that your own comfort could somehow be linked to that animal's comfort. Solitude can be a heavy burden, but sometimes it can also make us more attuned to the loneliness of others. Finally, after several days of hesitation, Arthur made a decision. A light autumn morning, he took his old wooden cane, put his hat spent, and left home with a purpose he hadn't felt for years. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. It was a personal pilgrimage, a journey toward the sound that had become the soundtrack of his lonely nights. He walked slowly, his old body protesting every step on the dirt road leading to the farm. The walk was long and tiring, but his heart was lighter than it had been in months. He didn't know what he would do when he got there. He didn't have a plan. He was just an old and lonely man, following the sound of another lonely soul, hoping that, upon finding the source of that pain, he could somehow begin to find a way out of his own. As he approached the farm, the lament became lighter, louder, more moving. He could feel the vibration of pain in the air, an almost physical presence that made him stop for a moment. He saw the farmer, Matthew, working near the barn, his face loaded with concern. Arthur approached slowly, and the two men, who had known each other for years, exchanged a nod. "I came because of the sound," said Arthur with a soft voice. Matthew sighed, a heavy sound of frustration and helplessness. "I don't know what else to do, Arthur. The vet says he has nothing, but he just won't stop crying, day and night. Looks like he's going to die of sadness." Arthur looked at the distant pasture, where he could see the dark and immovable silhouette of the bull. "Can I get closer?" he asked. Matthew hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "It can, but be careful. He's not the same animal as before." Arthur's heart beat faster as he opened the gate and entered the vast green pasture. The air looked colder there, the atmosphere loaded with melancholy. The bull was about 50 feet away, with his back to him, his head down. Arthur did not hurry. He moved with the slowness and patience that age had taught him, using his cane to establish himself on the irregular ground. He didn't want to scare the creature. He didn't want to be a disturbance in this world of pain. He just wanted to be a presence, a silent witness. He stopped at a safe distance, leaned against a fence pole, and simply observed. He saw the bull's wide shoulders shake with every deep moan, and for the first time, he saw something no one else had noticed. Real, thick tears, dripping from the animal's eyes and tracing dark paths in his dusty coat. At that moment, the mystery broke, and all that Arthur saw was a mourning companion. Arthur's loneliness had given him a rare gift, the ability to see pain in others. His own loss had opened his eyes to the invisible wounds that others carry. While the world saw a problem, a noisy animal, a mystery, Arthur saw a reflection of himself. He saw desolation, abandonment, longing for something or someone who had been forever. He was not afraid of that immense creature. He felt an overwhelming compassion, a wave of empathy that almost knocked him down. He remained there for almost an hour, without saying a word, without making a sudden movement, just sharing the space, sharing the silence between the laments. He was offering the only thing he had to give, his comprehensive presence. He was saying to the bull, speechless, "I see you. I see your pain, and you are not alone." When the sun started to lower on the horizon, Arthur knew it was time to go. He turned slowly and began his long walk back home. But something had changed inside him. The void on his chest seemed a little less cavernous. The journey in search of comfort to another creature had unexpectedly brought to him a glimpse of his own comfort. He had found a purpose, however small. That night, when sitting in his armchair, the silence didn't seem so oppressive. And when he heard the bull's lament in the darkness, he no longer heard pain. He heard a call, and knew with a certainty that he warmed his lone heart that he would return the next day, and the day after that. He had found his mission, to be the silent guardian of the tears of a bull. The next day, Arthur woke up before the sun. There was a new energy in its movements, a determination that surprised itself. He prepared his coffee, but this time as he drank it, his gaze was fixed on the distant hill. In his canvas backpack, he put a bottle of water, a bread, and 2 bright red apples in his garden. He didn't know if the bull would accept them, but it was a gesture, a peace offering. The walk to the farm seemed shorter that day, his steps driven by a renewed purpose. Upon arriving at the pasture, he saw the family scene, the bull immovable in his sadness, a statue of suffering against the green of the grass. The farmer, Matthew, saw him approaching, and this time a small flash of hope shone in his tired eyes. He opened the gate to Arthur, a gesture of trust and silent delivery. "He's still there," said Matthew. It didn't move. Arthur only nodded and entered the field, his heart beating with a mixture of apprehension and expectation. Arthur approached the bull with the same patience as the day before, moving in a slow, wide arc to not seem like a threat. The bull, feeling the presence, turned his massive head slowly. His eyes, turbid of pain, settled in the approaching old man. There was a spark of conscience in them, a silent question. Any other man could have retreated to that look, this mass of gross power, but Arthur saw no threat. He saw a wounded soul, as wounded as hers. He stopped about 10 meters away, a distance that respected the animal's space but allowed the connection. He didn't speak, he just stayed there, his calm and firm presence, a lighthouse of tranquility in the storm of bull pain. He unwrapped one of the apples, the sweet smell spreading in the morning. He didn't offer her directly, just held her in her hand, letting the aroma make the first contact. For a long time, nothing happened. The bull continued to look at Arthur, his deep moans punctuating the silence. Arthur remained immovable, his calm and rhythmic breathing. He did not try to force an interaction. He understood that confidence, especially when broken by pain, must be conquered, not required. He was a guest in the world of bull suffering and behaved with due respect, so something almost imperceptible changed. The bull took a single hesitant step towards Arthur. It was a tiny movement for such a large creature, but it was a meaningful earthquake. Arthur felt his heart jump. He remained perfectly motionless, allowing the bull to dictate the pace of the meeting. The animal took another step, then another, curiosity starting to fight against its deep lethargy. The smell of the apple was an attraction, but there was something more than pulling him forward. It was the aura of peace that emanated from the old man. The bull stopped just a few meters from Arthur. His breathing was heavy, and clouds of steam came out of their nostrils in the cold morning air. He stretched his neck, his damp nose contracting as he investigated the new smell and the strange presence. Arthur, with a slow and deliberate movement, placed the apple on the floor, halfway between them. And he backed up a step, a clear gesture that there was no trap, there was no danger. He was giving control, showing the animal that his safety and comfort were the priority. This small act of respect was the key that began to unlock the door of the bull's heart. He looked at the apple, then to Arthur, and in his eyes, for the first time in weeks, a different light of the pain began to blink. It was the light of consideration, the evaluation. He was seeing Arthur not as an intruder or a threat, but as something different, something he couldn't define yet. Slowly, with the majesty of a reluctant king, the bull approached the apple. He smelled her for a long moment, her muzzle brushing the red shell. Then, with a sound of crushing that echoed through the silent pasture, he devoured her. It was the first solid food he accepted in days. For Matthew, who walks from afar, it was a miracle. For Arthur, it was a conversation. The bull was responding to his offer. He was accepting his gesture of peace. After eating the apple, the bull did not go back. Instead, he raised his head and looked straight at Arthur, and for the first time, his regret ceased for a moment. In that silence, the two beings, the old man and the giant bull, simply looked at each other. And in that look, a universe of understanding was shared. They were two injured souls, two lone hearts that had found each other in the vastness of their shared pain. Arthur, feeling the change in the atmosphere, took a cautious step forward. He reached out, not to the bull's face or head, which could be threatening, but to his wide and powerful shoulder. His hand, wrinkled and trembling his age, landed gently in the thick coat. The bull shuddered with contact, a tremor that traveled his whole body. But he didn't move away. He remained there, allowing the touch, accepting human contact for the first time since his pain had begun. Arthur began to caress the animal, a slow and rhythmic movement, his hand rising and down the hot muscle. And as he caressed, he started talking. His voice was low and soft, a reassuring murmur. He said nothing special. He talked about time, about his garden, about Helena. He poured his own loneliness in those murmurs, sharing his own burden with the creature that understood him without needing words. A low sound came from the bull, but this time it was not the moan of pain that everyone knew. It was a softer sound, a deep sigh of surrender. He tilted his massive head toward Arthur, a gesture of trust so deep that it made tears sprout in the old man's eyes. The meeting of two wounded souls was complete. There was no more man and a beast. There were only two friends, two mates of misfortune who had found each other the balm they needed so much. The barrier between the species had dissolved, replaced by a bond forged in empathy and mutual pain. The man who sought comfort had found him by offering him. And the bull, who cried for a loss no one understood, finally found someone who saw his tears and was willing to help wipe them down. The farmer, Matthew, watched from the fence, with his eyes wide with astonishment and unbelief. He saw his intractable and dangerous bull become a docile creature under the touch of the old Arthur. He saw the animal accept food. He heard him sigh in contentment. It was a scene that challenged everything he knew about animal behavior. He did not understand the language that Arthur was using, did not understand the magic that was unfolding before his eyes. But he understood the result. He saw the healing starting to happen. He realized that what the bull needed was not a veterinarian or a medicine, but a friend. A friend who could reach his wounded part, the part no physical examination could detect. When Arthur finally moved away from the bull that afternoon, the animal did not resume its lament immediately. He stood still, watching the old man walking away, and a new silence he stopped over the pasture. It was not the tense silence of before, but a silence of peace, of expectation. The meeting had planted a seed of hope in the arid soil of sadness. Two Saligians met, and instead of adding, they canceled themselves, creating something new and beautiful in their place. Arthur's journey in search of comfort had led him to an unexpected destination, and the pain of the bull had guided him to the only being in the world that could understand him. The hill was still the same, the grass was still green, but something fundamental had changed forever. The lament was beginning to make way for a new song, the song of an unlikely friendship. From that first transforming meeting, a new routine was established in the life of Arthur and Taurus. Every morning, without fault, his grandfather made his pilgrimage to the hill. He no longer saw the walk as a burden, but as the highlight of his day. He brought small offerings from his garden, an apple, a carrot, sometimes just a handful of fresh clover he knew the bull liked. But the food was secondary. The true food he offered was his calm and consistent presence. He didn't try to train the bull or force him to do anything. He simply existed beside him, a silent companion on his healing journey. He sat on a fallen tree trunk near the pasture, reading his newspaper or just watching the clouds, while the bull dashed peacefully nearby. The language they shared was not made of words, but of simple gestures and mutual acceptance. It was the universal language of kindness, understood by any heart, regardless of the species. The days of incessant crying of the bull came to an end. The deep and painful laments that haunted the farm were gradually replaced by quiet silence. Occasionally, a low moan escaped, a memory of the pain that still inhabited its depths, but was fleeting, a fleeting shadow instead of the perpetual darkness before. He began to gain weight again, his coat recovering the healthy shine. More notably, he started moving. He was no longer stopped in the same place, a monument to his pain. He followed Arthur with his eyes, and when the old man moved, the bull accompanied him at a respectful distance, like a loyal and gigantic shadow. His transformation was remarkable for all who witnessed it. The power of Arthur's kindness was performing what no force or medicine could achieve. He was healing the soul of the bull, one gesture at a time. Arthur found that when taking care of the bull, he was also taking care of himself. His own loneliness, the emptiness left by Helena, began to be filled by this new purpose. He had someone who depended on him, someone who waited for his arrival every morning. The silent house no longer looked so empty, because his heart was full with the expectation of the next day. He spoke to the bull, whom he came to call a companion. He told stories of his youth, shared his wife's memories, vented his frustrations and fears. The bull listened, his great eyes fixed on Arthur, his massive presence a deep comfort. He offered no advice, did not judge, he just heard. And for an old and lonely man, having someone who simply listened was the greatest gift of all. The kindness he offered was returning to him in waves of peace and contentment. The farmer, Matthew, looked at the daily scene with a feeling of admiration and gratitude he could barely express. He had learned a deep lesson about the animals he thought he knew so well. He realized that they were not just machines to produce, but complex beings with rich emotions and deep needs. He saw Arthur, a fragile man in body, but immense in spirit, and understood that true strength does not reside in the muscles, but in the ability to compassion. He started leaving small gifts for Arthur in the fence, a bottle of fresh milk, a piece of homemade cheese, as a silent thanks for saving not only his bull, but also the peace of his farm. A silent friendship also began to flourish between the two men, united by the love and concern they both felt for the great animal. The news of the unlikely friendship spread spread through the village. People who once spoke of the crushing bull in fear or mockery now spoke of the grandfather and the bull with admiration and affection. Some came from afar just to glimpse the scene of the old man sitting peacefully next to the kind giant. History has become a kind of local legend, a parable about the power of goodness. She taught the community the simple but deep lesson that the most effective communication often does not require sound. A soft touch, a constant presence, an act of disinterested generosity. These are the words that the heart understands, the notes that make up the melody of universal kindness, a song that can calm the wildest of beasts and heal the deepest of human wounds. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. The friendship between Arthur and companion deepened, becoming an intrinsic part of the hill landscape. They developed their own rituals, their own nonverbal forms of communication. A bull head swing, a soft touch of Arthur in the animal's muzzle. Each gesture was meaningful, a silent dialogue between two friends. Arthur taught the bull that the world still contained kindness and confidence, and the bull taught Arthur that it is never too late to find a new purpose, to open the heart for a new form of love. Kindness was not just a cure, it was a bridge, a connection that joined two worlds, two species, two Solidians in a single and beautiful history of mutual redemption. There was no magical moment of complete healing, but a slow and gradual process, such as sunrise. Taurus' pain, like Arthur's, did not completely disappear. The scars remained. But kindness worked as a balm that relieved the pain, making it bearable. It has transformed the suffering of a prison into a memory, a part of its history, but no longer the totality of its existence. The presence of each other gave them strength to carry their losses without being crushed by them. They became each other's anchor in a world that sometimes seemed indifferent. Kindness did not erase the past, but made the present habitable and the future a possibility full of hope. Their history resonates because it touches a fundamental truth about the condition of all living beings, the need for connection. In an often noisy world, hasty and focused on itself, the simple act of stopping, being present to another being, of offering kindness without expecting anything in return is a radical act of love. Arthur had no training in animal psychology, nor had magical powers. He had something much more powerful, an open heart and the willingness to share it. Its companion story is a reminder that we all have the ability to be curators, to make a difference in someone's life, whether human or animal, through simple but deep language of kindness. In the end, Arthur's kindness not only saved the bull, she redeemed all who witnessed her. She changed the farmer, the village, and the Arthur himself. She turned a story of pain and mystery into a celebration of friendship and compassion. The Hill of Lament has become the Hill of Hope, a place where the most important lesson of all was practiced daily, that kindness is the most powerful force of the universe, capable of crossing any abyss, healing any wound, and uniting all souls in a circle of heat and light. The silence between the grandfather and the bull was not empty. It was full of the most eloquent of all conversations, the heart conversation. Pain in its crude form has a strange way to isolate and connect at the same time. For Arthur and companion, the shared experience of deep suffering became the foundation of a bond that transcended logic and common understanding. It was a bond forged in the fire of anguish and therefore became unbreakable. They were not just friends, they were survivors together, each having found the lifeboat in the other in his own ocean of sadness. The grandfather who had lost his anchor in the world found a new center of gravity in the care of the bull, and the bull, who had lost his desire to live, found a reason to lift his head every morning on the arrival of his human friend. His connection was a silent testimony that the deepest wounds can sometimes give rise to the strongest and most significant connections. The fellow transformation was complete. He was no longer the inmate and tormented creature that the valley knew. He became a kind giant whose affection for Arthur was evident to everyone. When the old man arrived in the morning, the bull greeted him with a low, smooth mute, a sound of pure recognition and joy. He walked alongside Arthur as a loyal guard dog, his massive presence being a source of comfort, not fear. He lowered his head to receive his grandfather's caresses, closing his great eyes in ecstasy. The bond between them was so palpable that it became the new wonder of the region. People came no longer to see a curiosity, but to witness a miracle of love and confidence that challenged the boundaries between man and nature. For Arthur, the days gained color and meaning again. The friendship with companion filled the silence that haunted him. He found a new joy in the simple things. The warmth of the sun on his back as he sat with his friend, the sound of the bull chewing on the grass, the feeling of his rough touch under his hand. He had rediscovered the ability to love and feel necessary, something he thought had lost forever with Helena. The bull did not replace his wife, but filled a different kind of emptiness, the void of daily loneliness. He gave Arthur a reason to get up, to walk, to take care, and most importantly, to smile again. Their bond was not just about healing. It was about rediscovery, about finding life and purpose in the most unexpected places. The farmer Matthew became a devoted guardian of this sacred friendship. He ensured that nothing disturbed the peace of Arthur and his companion. He changed the rotation of pastures to make sure his partner always had the best grass and was always close to where Arthur liked to sit. In a demonstration of gratitude and heart change, he promised Arthur that his partner would live his days on the farm in peace, never to be sold or taken away. The bull, who was once a financial asset, became a family member, a symbol of compassion and power. The bond between the grandfather and the bull had healed more than just two hearts. It had transformed the way a man saw the world and his place in it. Their story has become a living legend, passed from mouth to mouth in the village and neighboring cities. He became a lullaby for children, a sermon for believers, a tale of hope for the discouraged. It was a story that remembered everyone, that friendship can flourish in the most unlikely circumstances, and that love is not confined to shapes or species. The unquestionable bond born of pain was a lighthouse, illuminating a simple truth. All living beings long for connection, and empathy is the key that opens all doors. Arthur and companion, grandfather and bull, have become immortal through their history, their names forever associated with the beauty of pure and disinterested friendship. The years passed, and Arthur aged. His steps became slower, his walk to the hardest hill, but he never missed one day. On rainy days or intense cold, Matthew sought him in his old truck, ensuring that the daily meeting would happen. Companion, also aging, seemed to feel the growing fragility of his friend. He had become even kinder, more careful, moving slowly alongside Arthur, offering his massive body as a stable support when the old man stumbled. Their bond deepened over time, mutual dependence becoming even more evident. They were aging together, two old friends facing the twilight of their lives, side by side. A day came when Arthur could no longer get out of bed. His journey on earth was coming to an end. Matthew, with a heavy heart, went to the pasture to stay with a companion who seemed to feel the absence of his friend. The bull was restless, walking around the fence, constantly looking at the road that Arthur used to come. He let out a low lament, an echo of the pain of years ago, but this time he was a call by his absent friend. Knowing what needed to be done, Matthew, with the help of some neighbors, took a mate in a trailer to Arthur's little house. They guided him to the old man's bedroom window. Arthur, with his last sigh of strength, turned his head and saw his best friend's familiar face outside the window. Companion leaned the muzzle in the glass, and a low, soft sound, a good-faced sound and eternal love, vibrated through the room. Arthur smiled, a last smile of peace and contentment. He reached for the window, and his eyes closed for the last time. He did not die alone. He died in the presence of his loyal friend, the friend he had saved and who in turn had saved him. Their bond, born of pain, proved to be stronger than life itself, extending to the last moment. Companion lived for a few more years, a kind and melancholy giant who was careful with love for Matthew and the whole community. He spent most of his time near the trunk where he used to sit with Arthur, as if waiting for his return. His history and Arthur's have never been forgotten. They have become part of the soul of that place. a permanent reminder that love and friendship are most redeeming forces in the world. The unqualified bond forged between a lonely grandfather and a broken-heart bull has become an eternal legacy, proof that even of deeper pain, the most extraordinary beauty, and a love that neither death can break. What can connect the soul of a giant bull, plunged into a sadness that made him cry for days, and a lonely grandfather, who had already lost hope of finding joy? Sometimes the deepest wounds do not need words to be understood. In the vastness of the hill, where the lament of a powerful creature echoed as a mystery, an unlikely encounter was about to happen. This is not just a story about an animal and a man. It is over the invisible thread that unites all living beings through pain and compassion. Get ready to find out how a simple gesture of a grandfather not only silenced the tears of a bull, but also healed two broken hearts at once, proving that true friendship does not know species, age, or barriers.